FIFA wanted to make the World Cup bigger, fairer, and more competitive than ever before. Instead, it may have created a loophole. Not a loophole involving cheating. Not a loophole involving corruption. And not a loophole that breaks any official rules. But a loophole that could give certain nations advantages simply because they understand the system better than everyone else. For decades, World Cup qualification was relatively straightforward. Win matches, earn points, qualify for the tournament. But when FIFA expanded the World Cup and introduced major changes to the qualification landscape, something unexpected happened. Analysts began noticing strange patterns. Certain teams appeared to benefit more than others. Ranking movements started having greater consequences. Strategic scheduling decisions suddenly became more valuable. And qualification pathways that looked fair on paper didn't always produce fair outcomes in reality. The most surprising part? Everything was happening completely within the rules. No scandals. No match fixing. No secret agreements. Just teams adapting to a system that may contain opportunities FIFA never intended to create. And as more federations began understanding how the new structure works, an uncomfortable question started spreading throughout the football world. Did FIFA accidentally create a system where strategy off the pitch could become almost as important as performance on it? If that's true, the future of international football may have already changed. So what exactly is this loophole? How does it work? And why are some experts warning that FIFA's biggest World Cup experiment could have consequences nobody saw coming? To answer that, we need to go back to the moment FIFA decided to change the World Cup forever. For decades, the FIFA World Cup was football's most exclusive tournament. Only a limited number of nations could qualify, leaving many countries with little realistic hope of reaching the sport's biggest stage. Traditional powers dominated qualification routes, while smaller football nations often faced impossible odds. As football's popularity expanded across every continent, criticism of the system grew louder. Federations from Africa, Asia, North America, Oceania, and emerging European nations argued that the World Cup no longer reflected the truly global nature of the game. Millions of supporters were watching from countries that rarely had a genuine chance to participate. FIFA responded with a historic decision. The tournament would expand from 32 teams to 48, creating more qualification spots and opening the door to nations previously locked out of the competition. The goal was simple: increase representation, grow the sport, and create opportunities for developing football countries. At first, the change was widely celebrated. More teams meant more stories, more fans, and more regions represented on football's biggest stage. But beneath the excitement, something else was happening. The expansion didn't just increase the number of participants. It changed the entire competitive landscape. Qualification calculations shifted. Rankings became more important. Strategic planning gained new value. Most fans focused on the benefits. Few paid attention to the new incentives being created. Yet every competitive system rewards certain behaviors. And when the rules change, smart organizations adapt. The real question wasn't whether nations would adjust to FIFA's new World Cup system. It was whether some had already discovered advantages hidden within it. To understand the loophole, we need to look beyond goals, tactics, and qualification tables. The real story begins with something most fans rarely consider: incentives. Modern football isn't controlled solely by results on the pitch. Behind every international match sits a network of rankings, seedings, qualification routes, and tournament regulations. Together, these systems influence a nation's path to the World Cup. For years, qualification seemed simple: win enough matches and qualify. But FIFA's modern structure is far more interconnected. Rankings affect seedings. Seedings affect group difficulty. Group difficulty affects qualification chances. And qualification outcomes affect future rankings. When FIFA expanded the World Cup, many of these relationships changed. More qualification spots became available. New playoff opportunities appeared. Some confederations received additional places. Suddenly, ranking positions carried even greater importance. Individually, these changes looked harmless. Together, they created a new reality. Analysts began noticing unusual patterns. Certain federations scheduled friendlies more carefully. Risky matches against elite opponents became less common. Some nations appeared increasingly focused on protecting ranking positions instead of maximizing experience. Nothing illegal was happening. No rules were being broken. Teams were simply adapting to the incentives created by the system. That's what made the loophole difficult to spot. The rules weren't hidden. The ranking formulas were public. The qualification structures were public. Yet most people never connected the pieces. Many fans still assumed every match was arranged purely for sporting reasons. But behind the scenes, strategic planning was becoming increasingly important. The mechanism wasn't buried inside a secret document. It was sitting in plain sight. And once analysts started looking closely, they discovered the same behaviors appearing across multiple regions of world football, suggesting something much bigger was unfolding. At first, almost nobody noticed the effects of FIFA's new system. Fans remained focused on familiar storylines: qualification battles, coaching changes, emerging stars, and international rivalries. Any unusual ranking movement was usually dismissed as coincidence. But analysts studying international football began spotting a pattern. Certain nations seemed to be improving their positions faster than expected. Not because they had suddenly become football powerhouses, but because they appeared to be making smarter strategic decisions. One of the clearest examples involved friendly matches. Traditionally, developing nations often sought games against stronger opponents. Even in defeat, those matches provided valuable experience and helped teams evaluate their progress against elite competition. Under the new environment, however, those fixtures carried risks. A heavy loss could damage rankings. Lower rankings could affect seedings. Poor seedings could create more difficult qualification paths. Suddenly, federations faced a different calculation. Instead of asking which opponents would improve the team, some appeared to focus on which opponents would improve their position within the system. Individually, these decisions seemed logical. Collectively, they revealed a trend. The objective was no longer just winning football matches. It was maximizing competitive advantage. At the same time, expanded qualification places transformed regional landscapes. Nations that once required nearly perfect campaigns suddenly had alternative routes through playoffs or additional slots. Supporters viewed these changes as long overdue progress. Critics viewed them differently. They argued that ranking incentives, scheduling strategies, and qualification structures might be creating advantages FIFA never intended. As researchers compared old qualification cycles with the new format, the debate intensified. Some countries appeared to have easier paths than ever before, while others faced new uncertainties. The pattern was becoming difficult to ignore. Different federations, different continents, and different football cultures were reaching remarkably similar conclusions. Which raised a critical question: what exactly had they discovered that the rest of the football world still hadn't? By now, the discussion was no longer about isolated incidents. Similar patterns were appearing across international football, suggesting that some federations had adapted to FIFA's new system much faster than others. The difference wasn't always visible on the pitch. It was visible behind the scenes. The most successful federations recognized that World Cup qualification had become more than a collection of matches. It had become a system governed by rankings, seedings, scheduling, and long-term planning. Once they understood that, their approach changed. Friendly opponents were chosen more carefully. Travel arrangements were optimized. Tournament participation was evaluated strategically. Even the timing of matches became part of a broader plan. The objective wasn't simply to win games. It was to maximize the probability of reaching the World Cup. The logic was straightforward. If rankings influence seedings, and seedings influence qualification difficulty, then protecting rankings becomes valuable. A federation focused on that relationship may make very different decisions from one focused solely on development. Supporters argue this is simply intelligent management. Modern sports are built on strategy. Clubs use analytics. Coaches study opponents. Teams optimize performance whenever possible. Why should national federations behave differently? Critics, however, believe football should primarily reward what happens on the field. If qualification outcomes are influenced heavily by scheduling choices and ranking management, they argue the system may be measuring more than sporting ability. That disagreement sits at the center of the controversy. Because the loophole isn't a hidden trick. No rules are being broken. No regulations are being ignored. Instead, it appears to be an unintended consequence of how multiple rules interact. History shows this happens frequently in sport. Whenever competitions change, participants eventually discover advantages the designers never expected. Football is no exception. The moment incentives exist, organizations begin optimizing for them. The real question is whether those strategies are actually changing qualification outcomes. And to answer that, we need to examine the evidence. Opinions drive debates. Numbers test them. When analysts began studying the effects of FIFA's expanded World Cup format, the discussion shifted from theory to evidence. For the first time, researchers could compare qualification under the old system with qualification under the new one. The data revealed a clear change. Under the previous format, qualification margins were extremely narrow. One poor result could end a campaign. Many strong teams missed the World Cup simply because too few places were available. Expansion altered that reality. More places created more opportunities. More opportunities lowered qualification thresholds. And lower thresholds increased the value of even small competitive advantages. This doesn't automatically prove the system is unfair. But it does show how important margins have become. Analysts found that relatively small ranking improvements could significantly affect qualification prospects. A better ranking could lead to a higher seeding. A higher seeding could produce an easier path. An easier path could increase the chances of advancing. Small gains could create larger consequences. This is where the loophole debate becomes more serious. Critics argue that if ranking management influences qualification outcomes, teams may be rewarded for administrative strategy as well as football performance. Supporters respond that rankings are still based on results. No nation can improve without earning points on the field. Both arguments have merit. Several statisticians have also highlighted the role of feedback loops. Success improves rankings. Better rankings create favorable conditions. Favorable conditions increase the likelihood of future success. Over time, those advantages can compound. Regional comparisons added another layer to the discussion. Some confederations benefited more from expansion than others, making the value of rankings and strategic planning vary across the football world. The system became more complex. And complexity often creates opportunities, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps the issue isn't a loophole at all. Perhaps FIFA created a structure so intricate that unintended advantages were simply inevitable from the start. At first glance, this debate seems to be about qualification. Who reaches the World Cup? Who misses out? Who benefits from the new system? But the larger story extends far beyond a single tournament. Every major rule change eventually influences behavior throughout an entire sport. And that may be exactly what is happening here. FIFA's expansion was designed to grow football globally. More nations would have realistic qualification hopes. More federations would invest in development. More regions would gain representation on the world's biggest stage. In many ways, those goals are already becoming reality. Countries that once viewed World Cup qualification as impossible now see genuine opportunities. Youth programs are expanding. Infrastructure investments are increasing. Governments and sponsors are paying closer attention to football development. Those outcomes are difficult to criticize. Yet every change creates new incentives. As qualification becomes more attainable, federations increasingly focus on long-term planning. Data analysis has become more important. Performance modeling is more common. Decisions are often made years in advance rather than months. The modern football federation is no longer preparing only for the next match. It is preparing for the next qualification cycle, and the next one after that. This evolution has made international football more professional and more strategic. But it has also made it more calculated. Some critics argue that football should reward performance above everything else. Others believe strategic thinking has always been part of competition and that today's methods are simply more sophisticated. The disagreement is not about facts. It is about interpretation. Should football reward the smartest organizations? Or should governing bodies limit the advantages created by strategy? Sports have faced this question repeatedly throughout history. And FIFA is no exception. Because if the expanded World Cup has taught federations anything, it is that understanding the system can be almost as important as competing within it. The real question is what happens when everyone learns that lesson. Whenever a governing body changes the rules of competition, adaptation follows. Sometimes those adaptations are expected. Sometimes they reveal consequences nobody predicted. That is the challenge now facing FIFA. If the World Cup loophole truly exists, should anything be done about it? The answer depends on how the issue is viewed. If the system is working as intended, then there may be no problem at all. Teams still need results. Federations still need to perform. No regulations are being broken. From that perspective, strategic planning is simply part of modern football. However, critics argue that some incentives may be creating outcomes FIFA never intended. If qualification can be influenced by ranking management and scheduling decisions, pressure for reform could eventually grow. History suggests this would not be unusual. Football's rules, qualification formats, and ranking systems have all been adjusted repeatedly over time. Each change aimed to solve one problem while often creating another. Some analysts believe FIFA should simplify qualification pathways and reduce ranking-based advantages. Others argue that constant reforms create confusion and instability. Their view is simple. Federations should not be penalized for understanding the system better than their rivals. For now, FIFA remains committed to expansion and global participation. Yet scrutiny continues. As more qualification cycles unfold, researchers and federations will keep examining the evidence. And the biggest question remains unanswered. Is the loophole genuinely changing outcomes, or is it simply exposing how modern football really works? The answer may determine how the next generation of World Cup qualification is designed. At the start of this documentary, the question seemed simple. Did FIFA accidentally create a World Cup loophole? After examining the evidence, the answer appears far more complicated. Because this story is not really about a loophole. It is about incentives. Every competitive system creates them. And every competitor eventually adapts to them. Football is no exception. When FIFA expanded the World Cup, its goal was clear. Create more opportunities, increase representation, and grow the game worldwide. By many measures, those goals are being achieved. More nations now believe qualification is possible. More regions are gaining visibility. More fans feel connected to football's biggest event. But the reforms also created a new strategic environment. One where understanding the system can become an advantage. Not because rules are being broken. Not because anyone is cheating. But because successful organizations learn to operate within incentives faster than others. Throughout this story, we have seen how rankings, qualification pathways, and planning decisions can influence outcomes in unexpected ways. Individually, these factors seem harmless. Together, they reveal how modern football increasingly rewards preparation beyond the pitch. Some will see that as a flaw. Others will see it as evolution. What happens next may be the most important chapter of all. As more federations adapt, the system itself may continue changing. And that leaves one final question. Will the future of the World Cup be shaped primarily by football matches, or by those who best understand the rules behind them? As qualification campaigns continue under FIFA's evolving system, the debate is far from settled. Do you think these strategies represent clever planning or an unintended flaw in the rules? Share your perspective in the comments, because the story of how teams adapt to the modern World Cup may only be beginning.